have at the core of it a really heartbreaking story to talk about. But then after getting past the actual story, I want to discuss a larger point around it. So you guys may have been aware this story went somewhat viral, and like I said, it's super devastating. But a woman, Brianna Marie Grier, who's just 28 years old, had the police called on her for whatever reason. A mental health situation was what I had heard, and she got put into a police car. Again, the reason why I don't care about that is it doesn't matter why the police were called to talk about this story. She was put in a police car, and one of the officers didn't close the door. And so then once the car was moving, she fell out and hit her head and was in a coma, but then ended up dying. And so you have this situation where a mistake from a police officer led to her dying. Now, just hold with me if you're someone who feels like the left goes too hard against police officers. I really do have a larger, interesting, nuanced discussion to have in a second here. But first, I just want to give respect and attention to a heartbreaking story by itself. So let's quickly just break that down. And like I said, we have much more to talk about in relation to this. A report concluded that sheriff's deputies never closed the door of a moving squad car that a Georgia woman fell out from, resulting in her death. Brianna Marie Grier, 28 years old, sustained severe head injuries when she fell from the moving police car during an arrest in Sparta earlier this month. She died 6 days after the 15th of July arrest. On Wednesday, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations confirmed that Hancock County deputies failed to close the passenger's rear door near where Miss Grier was sitting. Miss Grier was handcuffed in the front of her body, not wearing a seatbelt. GBI concluded after reviewing numerous interviews, multiple body cam videos, and conducting exhaustive mechanical tests on the patrol car. So, here's the details if you are curious about what had happened. Miss Grier's mother had called police after her daughter experienced a mental health crisis, her family said. So that happens often. Someone's having a mental health crisis. For whatever reason, they're now threatening the safety of others or even threatening the safety of themselves, and people feel like they have to get the police involved. And this is why people advocate for some branch of the police department or that works with the police of mental health professionals who are not armed, who can go in these situations, even if the police are somewhere nearby, but the primary contact would be a mental health professional, because lots of police calls are in relation to a mental health crisis. And so being able to walk someone through that, being trained on that, would be very advantageous to all of us and to the people involved, because police aren't really trained on how to deal with someone to the level that a mental health professional would be when they're in that situation, and so it leads to terrible situations. And I do want to just say, it's always so heartbreaking thinking about from the perspective of this woman's mother who called the police, and now she feels like it's partly her fault. It's not at all. But knowing that she was the one who called the police that ended up leading to Brianna's death. So what's the larger point I want to make about this? It has to do with honesty from the police department, because originally they had claimed that she had somehow gotten out of the car herself, denied that it was them at fault. And obviously, if you know a police car, it's supposed to be like a little jail cell in the back of that car so that they can't reach up and get the officers in the car and they can't jump out the side. If you have someone in custody in the back of a police cruiser, you don't want them to be able to get out, right? So the idea that she would have busted the door open and leaped out of the car makes no sense. And so that was the story they went with initially. Now the investigation happened, and they, of course, found out what had really happened, which was, again, it wasn't malicious. I'm absolutely positive. They didn't purposely leave the door open hoping she would fall out. No, it was a mistake, a devastating, horrible, negligent mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. And so it's bad enough that mistake happened, but no one's claiming that you were acting maliciously until you lie about it. And so a point that I want to make is the police aren't a monolith. They're not one organization across the entire country. It's not a federal organ, and we have federal law enforcement, but the majority of police interactions that are happening are with your municipal police department, right? So it's all of these separate, somewhat independent municipal police departments at a local level, but we think about them in terms of police. And for that reason, I think the responsibility of police officers to rise to the occasion, to be honest, and to have integrity is much, much higher. They have much more responsibility because they are representing what most people see to be the police. And if I hear a story about the police department over in this place, over in Georgia, in some town in Georgia, being dishonest, and then I have some interaction with a police officer here, I'm not in Georgia. It's a completely different police department, but I'm still going to feel like they could be dishonest against me. They could harm me in some way, because it's hard to separate in our mind that it's different organizations. And I don't even expect people to do that. And so I think because the police have so much power, and also because their reputation matters, they need to recognize that and be as honest as humanly possible, which they're not. And that is why when you hear a story come out and they say, oh, we felt threatened and that's why we had to shoot someone, that happens sometimes, right? Sometimes the police justifiably have to use their firearms to protect themselves. But the reason why we don't believe them when they tell us that in certain situations is because of a track record, again, not necessarily in one police department, but just the police generally, of lies being told to protect them. And thus we don't have a underlying trust in their word, which is really harmful, in my opinion, to a society. When the people who have a monopoly on violence, when the people who have the weapons, who have the authority to arrest you and harm you if necessary, don't have the reputation of being honest, even if, again, you're a police officer and you know that you're honest, you have to recognize there are a lot of stories out there of them trying to cover their butt, just like this, telling a false story up front, not admitting that it was a police officer who left the door open. Now you don't have that reputation of being honest, and thus you're going to have much more antagonistic interactions with people and a much harder time having people believe your word, which I think a society where when the police say something went horribly wrong, but it's because, we felt threatened, I wish we could believe that, but we can't believe that. So we have to think, well, maybe you offensively harmed someone, and every single situation has to be looked through a lens of we have a hard time believing you, which is super unfortunate because of cases like this. Again, no one maliciously tried to harm her from what I'm aware of. Someone made a horrible mistake not properly closing the door that led to her death. What they should have done is come out immediately and admitted to that, taken responsibility. But because they didn't, that's another stain among many on the police. Again, even though they are a bunch of different separate organizations in a sense, we do look at them as one group. And so because of that, you're putting all of these stains on police officers on the other side of the country's reputation. Now people have a hard time believing police officers in LA and Austin and, Oregon or whatever. Portland. I did a bunch of cities in the state. So that's the larger point I wanted to make about this. But also, of course, heart goes out to her family, and so heartbreaking that this happened to her, to Brianna. But we need police to be honest, and we need police who have integrity consistently. Because one time you have a police officer who doesn't have integrity, now we have a hard time believing any of you. And that's the issue that we're facing in the country right now. And so how we make that happen on a governmental level is a larger conversation, but it needs to happen for sure.